Hi, I'm Caleb. Thanks for joining us on the Narrate Church podcast. This week is part 2 of a 4-part series called We Need You to Lead. We Need You to Lead is a series that talks about the importance of how leadership is central to living life well. This week, Adam talks about how we need to value our integrity more than our progress.
So we started a couple weeks ago a series called We Need You to Lead, and that was born out of this passion that oftentimes leadership is something associated with people who hold a certain job or a certain title or even a part of a certain field. And what we said 2 weeks ago is, wait a minute, aren't all of our lives deeply dependent upon people to lead? And don't all of us have lots of opportunity to lead? Whether we're talking about in the classroom and in your school, whether you're in 7th grade or you're a professional long into your career, that there are opportunities to lead, and that other people depend on you to take them. And likewise, as children, as kids, as employees, as community members, don't we hit these intersections in life where we need other people to lead us? Heard a stat this week that they said one metric was that the U.S. economy loses $360 billion a year to poor leadership. So that's kind of the tension that this is born out of, is to say, wait, we all are going to have to lead at times. We all are going to get to lead at times. And all of us, we end up at a place that is largely determined by the people in our lives and the leadership decisions we make. And so we started the series by saying that leadership is a stewardship. That was kind of the first principle, that it's temporary and that you're accountable. The idea there being that every relationship you have and every skill you have and every position you hold and every resource you possess, that is a temporary thing given to you. Whether you believe in God or not, the fact is it's temporary. The death rate is 100%. That all of us run out of time. And thus, that everything you have to invest in others and your community and the world and yourself, it has its end. This week, I want to talk about this idea, and I realize that in talking about leadership, we're talking about some pretty fundamental things, and my thinking here is, I think we're going to come back to this often. I think that part of the role that God would have us play as a church is understanding that what it means to be an organic church is that we lead well in the marketplace, in our homes, in our communities, in our schools, across the board. So I think we'll come back to this often, which means in this season of this series now, we're dealing with some kind of foundational ones. And what I'd like to talk about this morning is this idea that we need you to lead by valuing your integrity more than progress. Now that can feel heavy, but the reality is, let me just start by making you a promise. Ready for a promise? Sounds very name it, claim it maybe, but here's my promise. At some point along the way, you will be challenged, you will be tempted to compromise your integrity. In middle school and high school, in your 20s, as you start your career, in college, as a young married person, as a married person with teens in the house, as an empty nester, as I don't know how you refer to people beyond empty nest, at the twilight of your career. But you will face opportunities where you are tempted to compromise your integrity. And listen, here's what happens. This is one of those areas where it's so easy to be the critic, because we watch Fox News or we watch CNN, whichever one, nobody watches both, right? It's just an idea. You should maybe try that. But, we watch the news, and the story is consistently about some leader who had more influence, more resource, more power, more wealth, more likability than we could ever imagine happening, and they did something stupid. And what's really easy is to sit from our couch and go, man, if I had that much power, if I had that much wealth, if I had that much resource, if I had that much influence, if I had that position, and then we could break it down. If I had that family, if I had that life, I'd be so careful. And the question is, what happened? And I think, and I'm indebted to a few people for this morning, Andy Stanley being one and Brene Brown being another, I think the answer is, it's simple. It's not easy, but it's simple. The answer is, at some point along the way, they were tempted to compromise their integrity, and they took it. And I think to add a layer to that, the thing that I'd really like to drill down on this morning is that as we talk about that in kind of broad terms, I think it becomes all the more true when it comes to progress. Because we love progress, don't we? We love to move the ball down the field. We love to advance in our career. We love to get more respect. We love to have more money in the bank account. We love to have more people paying attention to us in the community. We love progress. And let's just be clear on this. I think God loves progress. I think when you read about Jesus and the story he tells and the people he unites himself with, he was a person, he was God, and he was a person who was passionate about people who had a bias for action. He wasn't into people who went like, hey, I need a job, so I'm going to play Xbox until I get one. He was into people who like go get a job. He was into people who were activators, who go do things, who love progress. And if I know anything about the culture of this place, it's that so do you. That's the compliment we get, is I love that we're doing things. So let me just kind of give you a promise that your passion for progress, it exposes you to a temptation that your friends who don't share it don't have. That your passion for progress, it makes you susceptible to something that lots of people aren't susceptible to. And that is that at some point along the way, all you have to do is like change that number on that form. At some point along the way, all you got to do is lie about that. At some point along the way, it's just one night. It's just college. That at some point along the way, you will be tempted, and it's not tempted in terms of like a general moral standard, because you go like, I'm ready for those. The ones that'll take you out, the ones most likely to take me out, are the ones where if you'll just cut that corner, you'll get the thing you've been praying for. You'll get the thing you've wanted, the thing God's promised you, the things you've worked so hard for. You've been at this for 30 years, and now it's one measly little law, and if you'll just break it, you can finally have what you own or what you deserve. I think our desire for progress makes us susceptible in whole new ways. And so what I want to do this morning is, because listen, you already know, like I don't have anything new to say. The best I can do this morning is help you to identify a decision that you're dealing with, a moment where you're kind of going, okay, I got this opportunity, I got this thing, I could do it, I can't, shouldn't do it, I might want to do it, I don't know what to do. I think the best thing I can do this morning is not to add new information, because you already get the message, but to inspire you to identify those areas in your life where you're being tempted to compromise your integrity in the name of success, in the name of progress. And to do so, I want to look at a story in the Old Testament. It's one that some of you may be familiar with. It's found in 1 Samuel. And listen, if you think the Bible is a bunch of boring narratives about a bunch of rules, well, it might feel like that if you read the book of Leviticus, but you should read Samuel instead. Samuel is this brilliant narrative with some really neat characters. The heroes are incredible heroes. The villains are incredible villains. And in Samuel is where Israel transitioned from a country being led by judges, which were these kind of periodic leaders. They didn't necessarily have a government structure under them, but they needed a leader. The country needed a leader, and so God would raise up a woman like Deborah, yes, women, or men, and they would lead. And then they would go away. And then the nation of Israel, they started to get envious, and they went like, wait a minute, all these other countries, they have kings. We want a king. And so God went, okay, well, you can have a king. And he anointed a guy named Saul to be king. And Saul was a very logical king. He was tall, he was handsome, he was a very accomplished warrior. He was the George Washington of Israel, quite literally. And over time, for reasons that we'll touch on a little bit this morning, but you should go back and read it, Saul eventually lost his place as God's king. He kept his place as king, which you've seen this happen too, right? Like the boss is still the boss, but he's not respected. Like that's what happened to Saul. And in what's happening in parallel to that is there's this guy, David, who is this servant-hearted guy who comes alongside Saul, and he's just really, really accomplished, and he leads his army, and he's not even necessarily positioning for the throne, but it gets to the point where when they come back from battle, the country would say, Saul has killed his thousands, David his tens of thousands. He becomes highly respected, and Saul, as is going to be the case with all of us someday, if it's not the case for you now, Saul starts thinking about his legacy. And Saul thinks, when I'm done, I want my son to be king. And Saul's smart enough to know that if he were to die today, his son Jonathan would not be king. David would be king. And so Saul begins this systematic hunt for David to kill David. It's just like kind of modern terrorist hunts that we've gone through with our own people, the only difference being that David was actually the good guy. And we're going to pick up in 1 Samuel 24 in this instance where Saul's, he's got him. He can get him. It says this in verse 1. We're just going to kind of work our way methodically through this. That's 2 sermons in the whole year where we're doing this style. So giddy up. After Saul returned from pursuing the Philistines, those are like the perennial enemies of Israel, he was told, David is in the desert of En-Gedi. Now, En-Gedi is a region in Israel just west of the Dead Sea. It's among the hottest, driest, most parched parts of the entire world. And what makes En-Gedi unique is there are these deep ravines that cut down to the Dead Sea, and there's these fresh water sources. That's where he hears David is. So Saul took 3,000 able-bodied men from all Israel and set out to look for David and his men near the crags of the wild goats. So we're just getting a little more specific here. But you catch that? Like, Saul's going to take 3,000 of his best troops, and he's going to go find David. Now, this next part, like, this passage is built for middle school. I'm convinced you could have a middle school ministry of thousands if you just talked about this passage every week, because I think it's the only time in the whole Bible that it talks about this. Listen to this. In fact, middle schoolers might be the only ones that understand what's really being said here, because you'll think it's not saying this. He came to the sheep pens along the way. A cave was there, and Saul went in to relieve himself. See, Caleb's giggling already. So let's just kind of set the stage here. Like, there's this massive troop. They're going to look for David. They're kind of marching along, 3,000 of them, pretty big entourage. They come to this spot, and Saul jumps off his royal steed, and he starts walking up to this cave. And they're like, what's Saul doing? He's going, water break. Just take a water break. Grab lunch. Everyone knows what he's doing. He's going into the bathroom to relieve himself, but he doesn't want to say that he's going to relieve himself. And can we just be clear, ladies, that men don't go into a cave to relieve themselves if it's number one? Okay, so let's just clarify that. He'd have just done that from his horse if he needed to. So Saul walks into this cave robed, like men wear robes here. So he's robed, and he walks into this cave to relieve himself, which what we know culturally means he would have disrobed, left his robe there, and went and squatted. So you got the picture. You with me? Middle school stuff. This is great. David and his men were far back in the cave. So you see the scene. So Saul is up there. He's in the most vulnerable position. Like, could you imagine being in a more vulnerable position? Like, if you could pick the ways that an enemy is going to attack you, could you think a place where that you'd like to be attacked less than this one? No, you can't. So they're in the back of the cave. Saul's in the front of the cave. They don't know. Saul doesn't know that they're there. Has no idea what's going on here. He's been chasing David and making his life miserable for months, for years. And listen to this. Listen to what David's guys say. I think they say the very thing that we would have all said to David. The men said, "This is the day the Lord spoke of when he said to you, I'll give your enemy into your hands for you to deal with as you wish." I mean, this is a God thing, right? That's the implication. Like, David, this guy has been making us miserable. See, David knew someday he was going to be king. God made that clear to him. David knew God promised that he was going to be king someday. And apparently they would sit around the campfire at night, and he would say to his guys, like, guys, I know it's miserable, but stick with me, because someday I'm going to be king, and we're going to be living in the palace. And then here they are. They're hiding in the back of a cave, and the guy that's been trying to kill them for a long, long time is in the front of the cave in the most vulnerable position possible. And they're going, David, go kill him. Go get him. And if you don't want to go get him, like, we'll go get him, but we got to go get him. Like, this is such an enormous God thing. I mean, what are the odds of this? What are the percentages of this even happening? I mean, this is like, the drama is so thick. I mean, can you just picture, like, the story being told afterwards? So Saul is marching through the valley. He jumps off his royal steed to go up into a cave to relieve himself. And 10 minutes later, David emerges. They just set down their arms right then and there, and David would have been king. Game over. Bloodless coup. Saul walks into a cave. 10 minutes later, David walks out holding Saul's head by his hand. Game over. David's king. Everyone celebrates. Everyone wants Saul out. And yet that's not quite how the story went. See, before we go on, let me just say this. What David seems to understand here is that this has all the makings of a God thing. Like, it has all the makings of looking like a God thing. God has promised him this. It's the progress that he's wanted for so long. It's what he's dreamt about. It's what he's prayed about. His guys know it. And what David demonstrates here, I think, is something that is one of the most difficult things. I know that I'm generally terrible at it. But see, my friend Fred in Billings, he's the best biblical counselor I've ever known. And he keeps a yellow reflector light, or orange, depending on what color you prefer. He keeps a yellow reflector light on his desk. And when he's talking to somebody and things are really, really emotional, he just slides the reflector in front of them. And his point is to say this: listen, Like this moment is so emotionally charged that you can't possibly just rely upon your own logic and your own brain power to make this decision. See, what David seems to understand here is that when the thing that we hope for, the thing that we've worked for, the thing that we've prayed for, the thing that God has promised, when that coincides with opportunity, it is really difficult to exercise prudence. When everything you've wanted is right in front of you, it's really difficult to make a smart decision. David knows that to really understand whether or not this is a God thing, because this is this thing that Christians do, right? Like you would think that somewhere in the Bible is a verse that says, God opened doors, which there's not that I can find, but it's so central to our theology because our thinking is if God opens the doors, then it's God's will. And to be honest with you, the reason why it's taken us 9 months to even get this far into the 3 gatherings thing is because I don't think it's as simple as going, well, if the opportunity is there, then take it. I don't think that's a sound way to live. And what David demonstrates here is that he understands that when these types of moments happen, when everything's perfect and it seems like it's a God thing, that you have to then begin to weigh the opportunity against something more objective than the opportunity itself. Because when you're with her and you're doing that and you just wait to see if like this is the opportunity, then you're toast. There's got to be something that you weigh it against. When this is going on in business and all you got to do is skip that form or change that number, you got to have something to weigh it against more than that. When it's lose your job or keep your job, when it's get promoted or don't be promoted, you got to have something to weigh it against. And this is where I think David can help us. Because the first thing that David does is he weighs the opportunity against the law of God. Now listen, I understand that for some of you that doesn't necessarily have any weight, that the Bible is not your standard, and that's okay, and we're grateful that you're here. Can I just challenge you to think of it this way? Even if it's not the Bible, the question becomes, in these moments, what's the standard that you weigh those decisions against? Because otherwise, what you're choosing is that you're the smartest person in the room, even when emotions are hot. I heard a statistic yesterday that's only mildly relevant, but they tested people's IQ in 3 circumstances. 1, just their general IQ. 2, when they were multitasking. 3, when they were stoned. The people who were stoned did better on the intelligence test than the people who were multitasking. Seriously, by 8 points. I don't know about you, I don't have 8 points to give up on my IQ test. It's the same idea here. David knows that when things are going on, watch out, because you better have a standard. Listen, even if you don't think it's true, it might be a good standard to consider. Then David crept up unnoticed and cut off a corner of Saul's robe. He just crept up there. Now, why was he able to creep up there unnoticed? Because his robe was probably nowhere near him. He was crouched over there lest he splash on his robe. Afterwards, David was conscience-stricken for having cut off a corner of his robe. That's kind of weird. He said to them, "The Lord forbid that I should do such a thing to my master." Now, that word master is a key word here. Because you know what David realized in this moment? What he realized is that it's against the law. It's against God's law to kill the king. And these guys are going, wait a minute. Like everything is pointing to this being the opportunity. Why would God give us this opportunity if he cared if we break that one little law? And David says, well, maybe the opportunity didn't come from God. Maybe it looks like a God thing and smells like a God thing and everyone's saying it's a God thing, but maybe it's not a God thing. And maybe the fact that I have to break the law to seize the opportunity is all I need to know it's not a God thing. And you can imagine the frustration the troops must have felt. You mean to tell me that we're going to continue to eat nothing and drink nothing and run for our lives all because you're not willing to break one little law? Come on, David. He says, the Lord forbid that I should do such a thing to my master, the Lord's anointed, or lay my hand on him, for he's the anointed of the Lord. See, part 2 of this is David knows that when God puts somebody somewhere, you don't undo it. And he's going, no. He's my master. He's the king, and God has made him king. How dare me undo that? You know what David doesn't know? What David doesn't know is in just a few short months, Saul is going to be in a battle with the Philistines, and they're going to be getting annihilated. And Saul's going to take an arrow, and every one of his sons is going to take an arrow, and they're all going to die. David has no clue. But what David's saying here is, no, not happening. Not happening. With these words, David sharply rebuked his men and did not allow them to attack Saul, and Saul left the cave and went on his way. I can only imagine how irritated they were, and the things that must have been leveraged. You moralist, you goody-goody, you whatever, legalist. Then David went out of the cave, and he called out to Saul, "My Lord, the king." Can you imagine a more odd feeling if you're Saul? You've just spent months chasing and trying to kill an innocent man. He had you in the crosshairs, and he so refused to stoop to your level that now he's calling out to you from the cave because now he's got the high ground, so he doesn't have to freak out going, "Hey, Saul, how's it going?" Listen to what David says to him. He says, when Saul looked behind him, David bowed down and prostrated himself with his face to the ground. He said to Saul, "Why do you listen when men say David is bent on harming you? This day you have seen with your own eyes how the Lord delivered you into my hands in the cave. Some urged me to kill you, but I spared you. I said, I will not lay my hand on my Lord, because he is the Lord's anointed. See, my father, look at this piece of your robe in my hand. I cut off the corner of your robe, but did not kill you. See that there is nothing in my hand to indicate that I am guilty of wrongdoing or rebellion." See, Saul, I'm not a lawbreaker. I'm not a rogue. I'm not a rebel. I live by standards that are bigger than my desire for progress. And then listen to this next line. He says, "May the Lord judge between you and me." You know what he's saying there? He's saying, hey, Saul, you've stooped to every level imaginable to obtain the progress that you so crave. And I'm not willing to do that. In fact, Saul, I'm not going to play that game. And what we see here in the next verse, I think here's the whole thing. If you're sleeping or going, is he done yet? Hear this one last thing. "And may the Lord avenge the wrongs you have done to me, but my hand will not touch you." See, what David is saying here is, I want it so bad. I've worked for it so hard. God has promised this to me so many times. But Saul, I am not going to make it happen on my own. I am not going to compromise the whole deal to make it happen on my own. What David is saying here to Saul is, Saul, I trust God enough that he can give it to me without me having to lie, cheat, and steal. Listen, here's the promise. At some point along the way, you're going to come to this moment, and the only logical option is going to be seize the moment, and yet the only thing you're going to have to do is compromise your integrity, and everyone around you is going to be going it's just one little thing. Just do it. You deserve this. You've worked so hard for this. Of course you can have this. It's just one night. It's just one tax return. It's just one purchase. It's just one little thing. Just take it. And I think what David demonstrates here is faith. And here's the point of tension that kind of messes with me. That if in this moment, David takes it into his own hands, he'll never know what God could have done. He'll never know how God might have accomplished his will, his way. I want to be careful here, and please don't read into this story, but I was having coffee this week with a friend per his prompting. It's a guy that I know fairly well and respect more than I know him. That makes no sense, does it? But I do respect him. And he called the meeting, and so kind of sat down to have coffee, and he started talking, and it was really apparent really quickly into the meeting that all he really needed me to do was listen. And what he started to share was he was in this relationship with this gal who lives in another city, and they've been dating for quite a long time, and they really want to start moving towards marriage, and she has a career that's such that it's not as easy as just hey, come get a job in Helena, it's going to be move here and not probably have a job for months, because she's in a pretty specialized field in a pretty urban area. And so without even kind of thinking twice about it, they had just arranged that she was going to come and she was going to move in with him. And he was sitting across the table from me going and it's a week away, and I'm going, whoa, time out. I don't know that I'm okay with this. Now, I'd like to think that the reason that he and I were sitting down was because he knows that even if we choose to agree to disagree here, we can be friends. So please don't read into this story. But it was really just my job to listen. And as he talked, all I could think about was the story. Because what became really apparent was, you think the only option you have is that one. Now, he was already conscience-stricken. I didn't have to do anything to make his conscience bug him. Don't even know if I would have. In fact, he even said, like, I can't find the verse in the Bible that says, thou shalt not live together. And it's like, good news. You can't find that verse. Like, it's a tricky situation. And so, like, I'm not here to, like, necessarily do anything here. This is complicated. And he said, yeah, but I just don't think I can do it. And I said, well, what if you stop thinking that the only option is that option? Like, what if you just move that option off to the side and you go, Lord, I see no other options, but I have enough faith in you that I think there are some. I said, what if you just move that off the table and you just sit back and see what God might be wanting to do that he's otherwise not going to do? Now, there's not an end to the story because we can all relate to my friend being at that point of tension going, yeah, but all logic says. Listen, when you meet that opportunity, the question is, are you going to trust God enough to do what looks to be impossible? And what this really gets at is that everything, I love the way Andy Stanley says this. Go ahead. Do we have that quote, Sam? Because I don't want to mess this one up. He says this, everything that looks like a God thing, feels like a God thing, and is suggested by others to be a God thing isn't necessarily a God thing. That we have to weigh every decision against some other standard. You can choose the Bible, you can pick anything you want, but that we need another standard. That we've got to have another standard. You know, think of Jesus and his temptations. Like what Satan says to him. You can go read this in Matthew 4 if you'd like on your own time if you're not familiar. But Satan says, hey, didn't you come here to get the kingdoms of the world? And Jesus goes, yeah, I did. Well, I can give it to you. Didn't you come here so that people would praise you and acknowledge who you are and your greatness? Yep, I did. Well, I can give you that too. In fact, I can give it to you today. And the reason why Jesus says, listen, every temptation you've dealt with, I've dealt with, is because he knows the temptation to go, wait a minute, God wants me to have it, and I'll just take it. I can just have it. John Maxwell, one of the better leaders that I'm aware of, he says it this way, the most direct route to whatever you want is rarely the best route. Isn't that true of you? Like when you bought your first house, when you bought your first car, when you dated your first person, when you got your first job, like it just rarely works out that the most direct one is God's. So how do we apply this? You're a step ahead of me. My challenge to you is this, that you weigh every opportunity, especially when you're emotional, against the wisdom and the principles of God. See, there's this other thing, and I skipped it, but even if the Bible is not the standard, I think David knows that it's just not smart. Like, how smart is it for a wannabe king to become king by killing the existing king? It's just not smart. Like, what happens to a king who becomes king by killing the king? I mean, is this the story he wants to tell his grandchildren? Like, Grandpa, tell us again, how did you become king? Well, there I was. Gather around. There I was, huddled in the back of a cave. And there came my arch enemy squatting over a rock. And I snuck up behind him and I slit his throat. And, Grandpa, you're so heroic. You're such a hero. Like, is that the story he wants to tell? I think the option you get is to weigh every decision you make against the wisdom and the principles and the law of God. And one more thing. I think to really live this out, you've got to give the right people an all-access pass to your decision-making. If you're really going to live this out, you've got to begin to lean into people. And here's the trick. The people whose advice you need the most are the ones that don't volunteer it unless you ask them. Like the ones that are constantly talking like me, like they don't have anything to say. The ones whose advice you really want are the ones who have listened to your story and they've overheard your story and they've heard you go on and on and they love you and they value the relationship so much and they understand learning that we learn on a need-to-know basis anyway, and so they're not just going to cast their pearls to the swine. They're just going to, well, they're not thinking you're swine necessarily. Don't take that too literally. But they're just going to wait for you to ask. You got to give the right people an all-access pass. The wisest person in the Bible, Solomon, wrote more on seeking counsel than anybody else in the Bible. Why? Because he understood that sometimes emotions are so charged, the reflector is so yellow, it is so difficult to see clearly that we've got to lean in to others to help us make decisions. Listen, I don't know what decision, I don't know what opportunity that you're dealing with. I guess my hope here this morning is that you would leave understanding that your character, that your integrity is worth way more than progress. I get to do enough funerals to know one simple thing about them. At a funeral, the only thing people want to hear is how great of a person they were. And I know that's cliche, but you know as well as I do that if in the gift of your leadership, the one gift you give people is your integrity, you'll be giving them something that is rarely offered. And if you're a guest or you're someone that's new to considering Jesus, or you believe in God but you don't know what to do about Jesus, here's the one thing I hope you would take away, and that is simply this. Jesus' invitation is about far more than arbitrarily getting you into a place when you die. Sure, that's included. His heart's desire for you, though, is to lead you. And when we make a decision to follow or not follow Jesus, it has everything to do with our posture towards wisdom. And saying, Lord, I'm not the source. I need outside help. And what separates Jesus from all other forms of self-help and spirituality is he doesn't just claim to have good advice. He claims to have power that is supernaturally given to you when you believe and confess in him. You could make that decision this morning. We'd love to have that conversation with you this week if you'd like. Let me pray.
If you would like to engage further with Narrate Church, you can find contact information online, www.narratechurch.org. We would love to hear from you.